The throne room of the Dragon Emperor was not only the heart of his vast galactic empire, it was the very symbol of unshaken power. For centuries, no enemy had dared to step inside, no intruder had crossed the burning gates of his palace. Yet on this night the throne room trembled, its golden walls cracked under the sound of distant explosions. Shards of light fell from the crystal ceiling, and the scent of smoke lingered in the air. The emperor, tall and broad, his armored cloak glimmering with metallic scales, sat upon his throne with eyes like burning stars, but even his patience was wearing thin. Somewhere in the chaos, among the panic of guards and servants, a young maid moved quietly, her steps uncertain, her small frame hidden behind broken pillars. She was bruised, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her side to stop the bleeding, but she said nothing. She did not want to be noticed, and yet the emperor's gaze found her. He had seen countless soldiers, assassins, and spies, but something about this maid was different. Her eyes carried an old sorrow, her skin faintly glowed under the flickering light, and her silence was heavier than screams. He did not look away. The hall grew quieter as the wounded girl tried to bow, but her body shook as if every bone inside her was broken. A guard rushed to help her, but she pulled back violently, fear flashing in her eyes. The emperor narrowed his gaze, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to curiosity. "What are you hiding?" his voice echoed, cold and sharp. The maid lowered her head, refusing to answer, but as she moved, the light revealed strange markings across her arms, markings that pulsed like circuits, glowing faintly as if alive. The guards whispered to each other in disbelief, some stepping closer with weapons ready, but the emperor lifted his hand, silencing them. The maid bit her lip, struggling to breathe, her wounds bleeding again, and then for a brief moment she looked directly into the emperor's eyes. Her voice was weak, almost broken, but the words carried an unbearable weight. "If I speak, your empire will never be the same." The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside the throne room, the echoes of war thundered through the night sky, but here in this chamber, only her words mattered. The emperor rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the floor like the wings of a dragon. He descended the steps of his throne, each footstep heavy, the air around him burning with the aura of his power. The maid trembled as he approached, her knees weak, but she did not run. She could not. Her secret was already too close to the surface. He studied her like one might study an ancient weapon, his eyes narrowing as the glow beneath her skin grew brighter. The markings spread like fire across her arm, then faded back into her flesh as if they had never been there. She gasped, terrified, and turned away, but the emperor's hand caught her shoulder. She winced from the pain, her body frail, yet inside her was something unbreakable. Something he had never felt before. "You are not what you appear," he whispered, almost to himself. The maid closed her eyes, her tears burning against her bruised cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows, but she knew the truth would not stay buried. The emperor released her and turned his gaze to his guards, his voice low but commanding. "Summon the guard," he said. The words rolled through the hall like thunder, shaking the hearts of every soldier present. No one questioned him. No one hesitated. They knew what it meant when the emperor called for his guard. It meant something had been found that was beyond the ordinary. Something dangerous. Something that could not be ignored. The maid's heart sank. Her body shook violently as if the sound of those words had triggered a memory she had tried to bury deep inside. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest as whispers of her past clawed at her mind, voices of pain, the cold hands of those who had made her what she was. She opened her mouth to scream, but only silence came. The emperor stood over her like a looming shadow, watching, waiting, his expression unreadable. He had faced countless threats, countless enemies, but he had never seen a servant, a fragile girl, carry such a storm inside her. He knew now that she was no ordinary maid. She was something else entirely. Something that might decide the fate of his throne. And as the sound of armored footsteps filled the palace halls, the emperor whispered to himself with a fire burning in his eyes, "The truth cannot stay hidden." The sound of armored boots echoed like thunder through the endless marble corridors of the palace. Each step grew louder, heavier, until the massive doors of the throne room groaned and opened wide. The Guard of Shadows had arrived. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were the emperor's most secret force, a creation whispered about in taverns and feared in battlefields across galaxies. Their armor was black as the void, fused with machine and flesh, their glowing red visors unblinking. They moved in unison, like predators who did not need words to kill. Even the bravest generals of the Empire dared not look at them for long. Now, as they entered the throne room, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, tighter, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The maid, still trembling on the floor, lifted her eyes and froze. She knew the stories. She had heard the cries of children back in the colony where she was taken, the whispers of these armored monsters who erased entire cities when commanded. But she had never thought she would face them herself. The Emperor stood tall in the center of the throne room, his eyes burning like twin suns, his voice cutting through the silence. She carries a secret. Find out what it is. The guards stepped closer, their heavy footsteps shaking the cracked floor. One of them, larger than the rest, extended a gloved hand and pulled the maid up by her arm. She gasped in pain, but she did not resist. Her body was weak, her energy fading, yet inside her chest her heart beat violently as if warning her that time was running out. The guard examined her, tilting her chin up to meet his cold visor. For a moment there was nothing but silence, then his deep metallic voice spoke with certainty. Her body is not ordinary. There is code inside her. Ancient. Older than the Empire. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. The hall grew tense. The maid's lips trembled as she tried to deny it, but the glow on her skin betrayed her. Another guard placed a scanner over her wrist. Lights blinked rapidly, lines of strange language scrolled across the display, symbols no one had seen in thousands of years. "This is not human," the guard announced. "She is carrying technology we thought extinct." The maid shivered, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, don't make me say it. Don't make me tell you what I am." Her words cracked under the weight of fear, but they only fueled the curiosity in the Emperor's eyes. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Then I will make you speak." She shook her head violently, tears blurring her sight. "If I speak, the stars will burn. If you knew the truth, you would destroy me before you let me live." The guards tightened their grip around her arms, their mechanical strength unyielding, but the Emperor raised his hand and stopped them. He wanted to hear it. He wanted to know why a broken maid spoke like a prophet of doom. He leaned closer, his shadow engulfing her fragile form. "You are not here by chance," he said quietly. "You are not a servant. You are something planted in my empire." "By who?" The maid's body trembled as memories clawed back into her mind. She saw herself as a child, surrounded by cold white walls, strapped to machines that burned her skin. Strange beings with voices like steel whispered of destiny, of becoming more than human, of becoming a weapon. She remembered running through fire, her colony destroyed, her family gone. She remembered the hands that carried her away and the command that bound her: hide, survive, obey. She swallowed the pain, shaking her head again. "If I speak, they will find me. They will find you. And no army, no throne, no guard will survive what follows." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, the maid's body convulsed. Her arms lit up with glowing circuits, pulsing like veins of fire. The guards stepped back, weapons raised, their armor humming with power. She gasped, clutching her chest as a faint signal pulsed from inside her, escaping like a ripple through the void. The throne room trembled as if the palace itself felt the call. The Emperor's voice thundered. "What did you do?" The maid collapsed to her knees, her breathing broken, her voice barely audible. "I didn't do it. It was always inside me. They will come. They are already coming." The guards exchanged silent glances, their weapons still aimed. The Emperor studied her, his mind racing, his instincts burning. He knew this was not a simple secret. This was a threat that reached beyond the Empire, beyond everything he ruled. She was not just a servant with hidden power, she was a signal, a beacon, a living key to something older and darker than his throne. For the first time in years, the Emperor felt the sharp sting of uncertainty. He clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on the maid who now lay trembling at his feet. Around them the silence thickened, broken only by her weak breath and the faint hum of her glowing skin. The Emperor raised his head, his voice low but filled with command. "Double the guard. Watch her every second. If she is what I think she is, the galaxy is not safe." The guards bowed and moved with precision, their red visors flickering as they closed around her like shadows. The maid closed her eyes, her heart sinking deeper. She knew the truth could not stay hidden anymore. The signal was already out there, racing through the void, calling the ones who made her. Somewhere in the darkness of space, something had awakened, and it was coming for her. The maid's body lay weak upon the cold marble floor, her breath shallow, her bruises deepening with every moment. Around her the guards of shadows stood silent and still, their red visors glowing, their bodies half machine and half flesh, waiting for the Emperor's next order. The Emperor himself remained seated on the throne now, but his eyes never left her. His stare was heavy, piercing, as if he could pull the truth out of her without words. Yet the girl kept her head bowed, trembling, her hands clenched against her knees. She knew this silence would not last. The Emperor did not allow mysteries to live long inside his court. He leaned forward, his voice echoing through the chamber, sharp and commanding. You carry something not born of this empire. Speak. Where did it come from? At first she did not reply. The weight of her past pressed too heavily upon her chest, but then, like a river forced to break its dam, her mind began to flood with memories long buried. She had been just a child when the sky above her colony had burned. Her world had been peaceful once, a small planet far from the heart of the galaxy, where people grew their food from the soil and lived under twin suns. She remembered her mother's voice singing her to sleep, her father's calloused hands lifting her onto his shoulders. But then the ships came, black and silent, blotting out the stars. They were not pirates, nor invaders of the Empire. They were something else, something stranger. Machines with eyes of silver descended from the heavens, and with them came men who did not speak like humans. They spoke in codes, their words clicking like broken gears. They called themselves the Forgers, builders of life not born but made. She had hidden under the floorboards when they came, but they found her anyway. Cold hands dragged her from her home, and she remembered screaming as her mother reached for her before disappearing in fire. After that, there were no more songs, no more sunrises. Only white walls, endless machines, and pain. They cut into her flesh, not to kill her, but to change her. They placed veins of metal under her skin, circuits that burned when she cried. They spoke of destiny, of experiments that would outlive empires. You will be the weapon that bends kings, one of them had said, his face blurred by the mask of a machine. For years she had been kept inside their labs, her childhood stolen, her body broken and rebuilt. She remembered being strapped to tables as strange lights scanned her blood, as liquids were injected into her veins. Sometimes she would see other children, but they never stayed long. Some screamed until silence took them. Some vanished into the dark rooms and never returned. She had learned not to ask questions. She had learned only to endure. And then one day, during a great battle she could not understand, the labs shook and alarms wailed. Explosions tore through the walls, and in the chaos she escaped. She ran through fire and bodies until she collapsed at the edge of a burning city. It was there that soldiers of the Empire found her, too broken to speak, too young to explain. They thought she was nothing more than a lost girl from a ruined world. They took her in, gave her clothes, gave her work. And so she became a maid, small and invisible, silent in the halls of power. She hid her scars, she hid the glow in her skin, and she hid the truth that she was never truly free. As the memories clawed through her mind, her tears fell upon the cracked marble. The guards stood unmoving, but the Emperor studied her face, his eyes cold yet filled with calculation. He could see now that she was not lying. Every broken breath she took was proof of a truth more terrible than he had imagined. The Forgers, he said slowly, the name burning his tongue like poison. The guards stiffened at the word. It was a name whispered only in ancient records, a race of builders thought extinct before the Empire was born. Myth said they created weapons that could end worlds. Myth said their experiments turned flesh into storms. The Emperor's voice dropped lower, his words heavy as stone. If what you carry inside you was made by them, then you are not a servant. You are a living weapon. The maid shook her head, choking on her tears. I never wanted to be. I only wanted to live quietly. But they will never let me go. They will come. They always come. And as if her words were prophecy, the markings on her arms pulsed with light again, brighter this time, spreading like veins of fire across her skin. The guards raised their weapons, their machines humming, but the Emperor lifted his hand. His gaze was locked on her, and in his eyes burned something rare, a spark of unease. The glow on her arms flickered, and from deep within her body a signal burst forth, invisible yet strong. The palace trembled faintly as though something vast and far away had answered. The Emperor's jaw tightened. He knew now that this girl was not only a secret, she was a beacon. Somewhere beyond the stars, the forgers had heard her call. Somewhere in the darkness, they were waking. And soon, they would come. The stars beyond the palace burned cold and distant, but tonight the darkness of space stirred with movement. Far from the Emperor's world, beyond the border patrols and trade routes of the Empire, something ancient answered the signal that had been released from the Maid's trembling body. It began as a flicker, a faint distortion in the void, then grew into a storm of light. From the black sea of nothingness, ships emerged, sleek and silent, shaped like blades of glass. They did not roar like the vessels of men, they whispered through the void, bending gravity, bending space itself. They were the fleet of the forgers, and their arrival was not a march of war, but the awakening of a predator reclaiming its lost creation. Within the palace, the Emperor stood upon the highest balcony, his eyes narrowing as the reports reached him. His admirals spoke in rushed tones, their voices trembling despite years of hardened service. Unidentified fleet has crossed into the outer rim. Their speed is unnatural, their signature unknown. They do not answer hails. They are coming here, my lord. The Emperor's jaw clenched, his armored hands gripping the railing. He had faced countless enemies, broken rebellions, crushed invaders, but this was something different. His gaze turned back toward the throne room where the Maid sat under the watch of the guards of shadows. She was pale, her body shaking as though the very stars were pressing down upon her shoulders. She knew. She had always known they would come. When the guards stepped closer, demanding answers, she looked up with hollow eyes. "I told you," she whispered, her voice thin as glass. "They are coming for me. Not for your throne, not for your crown. For me." One of the guards seized her arm roughly, but the Emperor lifted a hand, stopping him. "Explain," he ordered, his voice heavy with command. The Maid swallowed hard, her throat dry, but she forced herself to speak. "They made me. I was their experiment, their weapon. I was meant to be their key against kings and empires. When I escaped, I thought I was free. But I was never free. The signal inside me was always theirs. They planted it to call them back to me when the time was right. And now they have come to claim what belongs to them." Her words hung in the air like a curse. The guards shifted uneasily, their visors glowing as they processed her confession. The Emperor's eyes burned brighter, not with fear, but with a storm of fury and thought. He was a ruler who trusted nothing but power, and now in front of him stood a fragile girl who carried a threat older than his empire. Yet she was also the only one who might understand the enemy that approached. Outside, alarms blared through the capital as the forgers' ships crossed the last defenses of the rim. Civilian freighters fled like insects, their engines burning as they scattered from the incoming fleet. The Empire's warships moved into formation, black steel against the void, but even from a distance the enemy looked different. Their ships pulsed with strange light, as though alive, their movements too precise, too perfect. They were not machines piloted by men. They were something beyond, something crafted with purpose the galaxy had forgotten. "My lord," one admiral stammered through the comms, "their fleet does not slow, does not signal. They move as if they are one body. Our scanners, they cannot measure them." The Emperor turned sharply toward the Maid, his cloak whipping behind him. "If they are coming for you, then you will speak now. How do we fight them?" The Maid shook her head, clutching her arms, her voice breaking. "You don't fight them. You survive them. The forgers do not come to conquer. They come to reclaim. And they will not leave until I am theirs again." Her words stung like poison in the Emperor's chest, but he refused to yield. He rose from his throne, his voice echoing with the fire of command. "Then they will find the Dragon Emperor waiting. Summon every fleet. The Guard of Shadows will not leave her side. If they want her, they will walk through fire and blood to take her." His voice thundered through the halls, and his soldiers saluted with trembling fists. But in the Maid's heart, dread only deepened. She could still hear the voices of the forgers in her memories, the cold words of the ones who had made her. "You are ours. You will return." Her body shook as she whispered to herself, "I don't want to go back. I don't want to be their weapon." Yet outside, the skies were already burning. The Forger's fleet broke through the outer defenses like glass through paper. Imperial warships fired with all their strength, but their cannons only scraped the edges of shields that rippled like water. The Forgers did not retaliate with missiles or lasers. Instead, beams of silent energy spread from their ships, freezing engines, shutting down systems, leaving massive battleships adrift in the void like toys. The Emperor watched from the command screens, his fury boiling. Never had an enemy reduced his armadas to silence so quickly. Never had his throne been so directly threatened. His hand tightened on the hilt of his blade, the symbol of his rule, forged from the core of a dead star. His voice dropped low, cold, unshaken. So they dare to come for my empire. Then let them. But they will learn the price of crossing me. Behind him, the maid's voice cracked with fear, her eyes wide with tears. You don't understand. They don't want your empire. They don't want your crown. They only want me. And if you try to stop them, they will burn every star you hold dear until nothing is left. The Emperor turned his gaze upon her, his eyes blazing like suns, and for the first time there was no command in his voice, only a dangerous curiosity. Then tell me, maid of broken flesh, why are you worth a galaxy's destruction? Her silence was the only answer, but outside, the dark fleet of the Forgers closed in, and the shadow of war fell over the stars. The war had begun. The skies above the Dragon Emperor's world burned as Imperial fleets clashed with the advancing Forgers. The horizon was filled with fire, streaks of energy tearing through the darkness, explosions scattering across the heavens like shattered stars. The capital shook with the thunder of distant battles, yet inside the palace the air was tense and suffocating. The guards of shadows stood in their black armor, watching the maid with weapons ready, while the Emperor remained seated on his throne, his eyes fixed upon the command screens that showed the battle beyond. His jaw was hard, his fury quiet, but his mind raced like a storm. He had never faced an enemy like this, one that did not fight to conquer or destroy, but to reclaim. On the screens, Imperial warships fell one by one. The Forgers' vessels moved with terrifying grace, each motion as though they were one organism, not a fleet. Their beams of energy bent physics itself, shutting down entire battalions without firing a single shot. Vast carriers of the Empire, each capable of destroying planets, now drifted helplessly in the void, their systems dead, their crews stranded. The Emperor's admirals shouted reports over the comms, their fear thinly veiled beneath duty. Shields collapsing on the western flank. Engines disabled across the Third Armada. The Forgers are advancing without resistance. The Emperor clenched his fists, his cloak rustling as he rose from the throne. His voice was deep and steady, but the fire in his tone burned hotter than the battles outside. They think they can break me with their silent tricks. Let them try. If their machines bend space, then we will bend fire. Order every ship to strike at once. Burn the void until it bleeds. The command went out, and the Empire answered with fury. Thousands of warships unleashed their weapons in a storm of destruction, beams and cannons lighting the heavens brighter than suns. Explosions rippled across the Forgers' fleet, tearing through the darkness with violent beauty. For a moment, hope sparked in the hearts of soldiers watching from afar. But when the flames faded, the truth was clear. The Forgers' ships emerged almost untouched, their bodies glowing with strange light, repairing themselves even as they advanced. What damage had been done was gone in seconds, as though the Empire's greatest power was nothing but wind against stone. In the throne room, the maid's body shook. She had seen this before. She had seen how the Forgers consumed fleets, how they turned the strongest armies into drifting wreckage. Her skin began to glow again, markings pulsing brighter with every strike outside, as though her very blood was answering the battle. She clutched her chest, gasping, her bones aching under the pressure of the power awakening inside her. A guard reached forward to restrain her, but before his hand touched her, the glow spread violently. Her body convulsed, and a wave of energy exploded outward, shattering the marble floor beneath her. The guards staggered, their armor groaning under the shock, and the Emperor himself stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he watched her trembling form. The maid screamed, her voice raw and desperate, but the sound was not just human. It tore through the air like the scream of 1,000 machines. Light burst from her eyes, and the chains of her past broke loose inside her. Weapons of energy bent around her body, guards' spears melted into liquid, and the palace trembled as though struck by an earthquake. When the glow subsided, She collapsed, weak and broken, her body trembling like a dying flame. Yet everyone who had seen her power knew the truth: she was not a servant. She was a weapon. The Emperor approached slowly, his expression unreadable. He stood over her, his shadow covering her bruised body, and his voice was low, filled with dangerous curiosity. You can shatter armies with a breath. You carry storms in your blood. And yet, you hide as a maid. Why? Her lips trembled, blood staining the corner of her mouth. She whispered with what little strength she had, because every time I use it, I die a little more. My body breaks. My bones crack. I was never meant to live. Only to be used. The Emperor stared at her, silent for a long moment. His empire burned beyond the walls, yet his gaze remained fixed on the broken girl who carried enough power to level worlds. He saw now the truth in her words. She was not only a weapon but a sacrifice, made by hands that valued destruction over life. She was dying every time her power awoke, and yet she fought to resist it. The guards stepped forward, demanding orders, but the Emperor raised a hand to silence them. His eyes never left her. They named you their creation, he said slowly. But I see more. You are their weapon, yes, but you are also the one thing they fear. Otherwise they would not come in such force to reclaim you. Her vision blurred, tears mixing with blood, and she whispered again, her voice like fading fire. I never wanted to be their weapon. I never wanted to be the end of worlds. I only wanted to live as myself, but they will never allow it. Suddenly, her body convulsed once more, and a final whisper escaped her lips before she fell unconscious. The name was sharp, filled with dread. The Black Dragon. The throne room fell silent. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his fury giving way to something deeper. The name was not unknown to him. It was carved into the oldest records of the galaxy, the legend of a forger creation who commanded storms, a shadow said to rival gods themselves. If the maid spoke truth, then she was not only their creation. She was bound to the Black Dragon, and the forger's fleet came not only to reclaim her, but to awaken what was buried inside. Outside, the enemy fleet pressed closer, their silent ships casting shadows across the skies. Inside, the Emperor stood over the unconscious maid, his mind torn between rage and revelation. The empire burned, his throne trembled, and yet his gaze was fixed on her broken body. She was both his greatest threat and his only hope. And in that moment, he knew the war was no longer about fleets or crowns. It was about her. And about the Black Dragon who waited to rise. The palace was silent, yet the silence was heavy, crushing, as though the very walls held their breath. Beyond the golden towers of the capital, the skies blazed with fire as the forger's fleet closed in. Their ships cut through the void with cold precision, their silent weapons disabling imperial armadas as if swatting aside insects. The Emperor stood tall upon his throne dais, his cloak draped like the wings of a dragon, but for the first time his heart was weighted not by the fear of losing his empire, but by the presence of the unconscious maid at his feet. She was pale, her chest rising in shallow breaths, her body trembling with unseen storms. The guards of shadows waited around her, their red visors glowing, their weapons raised, yet none dared strike. They had all seen her unleash power that could split stone and shatter weapons with nothing but a scream. Even the most merciless of them now hesitated, unsure if she was meant to be killed or protected. The Emperor's mind was sharpened by rage and thought. He had fought wars against rebels, against rival kings, against beasts born in the stars, but never had he been forced to face a choice like this. The maid was not only a threat, she was also the key to the forger's arrival. To kill her might buy time, might deny the enemy their weapon. But to trust her, to use her, might mean survival against an enemy that had never been defeated. His voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. Wake her. A guard knelt beside her, injecting her with a stimulant. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly with that strange light, her breaths ragged. She tried to sit, but her body was too broken. She looked up at the Emperor, tears trembling in her eyes. He knelt slightly, his shadow engulfing her frail form, and his voice dropped low, dangerous, filled with the weight of choice. They made you to destroy me. Is it true? Her lips trembled, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, in a voice that cracked like broken glass, she whispered, Yes. I was their blade. Their design was to end your throne, to kill the Dragon Emperor. But I chose not to be. I hid myself. I bent myself to servitude rather than become what they wanted. Her words struck the chamber like a blade. The guards shifted, their grips tightening on their weapons, waiting for the Emperor's wrath. But his face remained unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed the storm raging within. She had been the very weapon meant to end him, yet she had chosen to serve him instead. He studied her long, his expression carved from stone. "Then why?" he asked. "Why spare me?" Her tears spilled, running down her bruised cheeks. "Because I wanted to live as myself. Not as their weapon. Not as your executioner. In serving, I found silence. In silence, I could pretend I was free. But freedom was a lie. They always knew where I was. And now they are here." At that moment, the palace shook violently as another blast ripped through the outer defenses. The forgers' ships had breached the last barrier. The comms crackled with reports, Imperial fleets falling, soldiers dying, cities trembling under the shadow of the enemy fleet. The sky was a storm of fire, and the end was rushing closer with every heartbeat. The Emperor stood tall, his eyes blazing like stars, and he turned back to his guards. "Prepare for the final battle. Every ship, every blade, every shadow. We fight until the last star burns." The guards saluted, their metallic voices answering as one. Yet in the center of the chamber, the maid shook her head, her voice breaking as she cried out, "You cannot win. They will not stop. They do not know defeat. They will tear your empire apart until nothing remains." The Emperor turned back to her, his expression hard, but within his gaze burned a flicker of something rare, a spark of belief. He lowered his voice, his words sharp as steel. "Then fight with me. Not as their weapon. Not as my maid. But as yourself. Fight, and prove that even the forgers cannot control you." The words struck her like fire. She trembled, her body racked with fear, yet in her heart something stirred. For the first time, someone had spoken to her not as an experiment, not as a tool, but as a choice. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice grew steadier, burning with fragile resolve. "If I fight, I may not survive. Every time I use this power, it kills me." The Emperor stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and his reply was cold yet unyielding. "Then die as more than their creation. Die as the weapon that chose its own fate." A silence followed, broken only by the distant thunder of war. The maid closed her eyes, her trembling hands curling into fists. Slowly, painfully, she stood, her fragile body glowing brighter with every step. The markings spread across her skin like fire, and the palace trembled with the awakening of the storm inside her. She raised her head, her eyes burning with light, and for the first time she did not look like a servant. She looked like something forged to break gods. The skies outside erupted as she unleashed her power. Beams of energy surged from her body, shattering the forgers' weapons, bending their ships, tearing through the void like waves of fire. The Emperor's fleets rallied behind her storm, striking with renewed fury. The battle became chaos, screams, fire, stars burning brighter than ever before. The forgers' fleet pressed forward still, relentless, endless, but now they faced the one thing they had never predicted, their own creation fighting against them. But the power tore at her body. Blood spilled from her lips, her breaths came ragged, and each burst of energy broke her bones further. She screamed as light poured from her, but she did not stop. She burned, she fought, she tore through the endless fleet until the skies themselves cracked with fire. And then, in the heart of the battle, the glow consumed her completely. The forgers' fleet faltered, their perfect unity breaking for the first time. The black dragon's shadow stirred in the darkness, but before it could rise, the maid unleashed one final scream, a storm so bright that even the Emperor shielded his eyes. And then she was gone. The skies grew silent. The forgers' fleet withdrew, vanishing into the void like ghosts, leaving only drifting wreckage and broken stars. The palace shook with the silence of survival. The Emperor stood upon the balcony, his eyes searching the horizon, but there was no sign of her. Only the faint whisper that lingered in the air, carried like smoke from dying fire. "I will return."